The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Solve Your Epic Printer Issues with Cortex Services and PrinterLogic. My name is Hannah Westra with Cortex Services. Joining me is Eric Johnson from PrinterLogic and Chuck Chesner, also from Cortex Services. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to address. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available to you after the session. If you have any questions during the session, you can enter them in the question box that you see on the right of your screen. You can enter them throughout the webinar, or if you prefer, you can save them for the end. We will have a question and answer session. At this time, I'm going to pass it over. Oh, sorry, one second. I'm just going to go through an agenda here. So we went over the welcome and housekeeping items. Shortly, I'm going to pass it over to Chuck Chesner to do a Cortex overview, then hand it over to Eric Johnson for the PrinterLogic demo, and then wrap it up with questions and next steps. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Chuck.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that don't know, Cortex Services, we are a IT consulting and solutions firm based in the Farmington Hills, Michigan area. We've been around since 2005, where we got our start in the healthcare VDI space, and since then have really taken the opportunity to just utilize the different partnerships and really work in a lot of different spaces. So between being a global managed services partner with Microsoft, we are one of the 4 in the US and one of 20 globally. Additionally, earning the highest levels with different partners as well. So some of the spaces, as I mentioned, we got our start in was virtualization. That's where we were founded in, and as we started working through that space, quickly found out just the need for a data center, and that's really where we started helping people develop the data center space, and quickly obviously noticed that there was a very big need for the managed services piece as well, because as soon as you got everything up and running, there is quite a need to keep that managed properly. And so from there, we obviously started working in the cloud and Microsoft space. And again, this is where 2 years ago, where we really got our foundation for cloud and have since become the top Azure consumer for Microsoft Cloud solutions providers. And so in addition to that, we do have just a testimonial from a healthcare company, a very large healthcare company that we were working with. And again, just telling a little bit of their story on the proof of concept that we went through with them and how we were able to just help them, and 9 months later, helping them getting the roaming desktop reconnected to the different desktops in 10 to 22 seconds. And so that is kind of where we specialized in the healthcare space. And then from that point forward, Cortex was able to re-engage and took over the lead troubleshooting role, developed an integrated test plan to systematically rule out technologies and configurations, and just won back the customer's trust.
Awesome, thanks, Chuck. All right, so now I'm going to pass it over to Eric Johnson to do the PrinterLogic demo. So just give us 1 second here while I make him the presenter.
All right, perfect. So I've got the presenter rights now. I'll go ahead and share on my screen. And what I want to do is just kind of take you through the printer installer platform, kind of teach you about what we're able to do. We're excited about our partnership with Cortex and some of the revolutionary technologies that they offer. And we feel like we're part of that with what PrinterLogic is able to do. So the organization that I represent is PrinterLogic. The software that I'm going to be showing you is called Printer Installer. Basically, the core tenet of our software is our ability to eliminate print servers position is that you pull out the print servers, you replace it with direct IP printing, and you have a whole management suite to help you manage all of your printer deployments, driver management, all that kind of stuff. And we do great with that Epic and Meditech space as well. I can show you as we go through this demonstration how we can ease the burden of managing those infrastructures as well. So that's kind of my goal today. I'll take you through a couple kind of high-level overviews of different features of the software, and then we'll get a little bit more granular. So that's kind of what I'm planning to do. I've got my screen shared out right now. Hannah, do you mind if I just check with you? Is that displaying okay? You can see Printer Installer up here at the top.
I sure can.
All right, perfect. So this is my administrator console. When we talk about Printer Installer, we've got really 3 core components to this solution. The administrator console is the component that allows me to manage my printers. So you can see kind of over here in this organization, I created one to model my own organization, my headquarters, right? So I've got this end user facing environment here where the administrator is going in the back end and configuring things, managing printers. You can see if I switch from like a folder view in that tree structure, I've got some options. If I switch over to a specific device, I've got some different options. And you're probably noticing too, as I click around, I've got pretty much every manufacturer of devices. We're a printer agnostic solution, so we can support whatever you're seeing in your own infrastructure. Our only requirement is that you have a signed driver on your printer. So for an administrator, they step into this interface and they're going to have everything like queue management, checking the status for SNMP monitoring of a device, and maybe it's gone offline, maybe it has low toner. There's things that we can monitor at that level. And there's also deployment of printers and driver management. So all that kind of stuff is combined for the administrator. On the other side of it, component number 2, I would say, is the self-service portal. Now, this makes it really simple for me to, as an end user, self-install a printer. So if you're seeing things like help desk tickets related to printer installs or drivers, this is one way to deal with it that's really effective. You can see with a map, it makes it really intuitive for me to kind of go around and decide which printer I want to install. If I want to choose one to install, that's the process for me as an end user. It's really easy. So now the help desk isn't going to be involved with this printer deployment process. They can have end users point into this interface here, self-install a printer. And the other cool part is they don't have to have administrator rights. I've got this client agent sitting here in the system tray, and it's running as a system service with administrator rights. So I don't need my end users to have those elevated privileges. This is something that you can put out there and be confident that it's going to do what it says it can do. Now, there's a couple things to build this out, and I'll show you how that's done. But that's not the only mechanism that we rely on to deploy printers. We also have automated systems that I'll show you in just a minute that can control how a printer gets distributed to end users. So just touching on this client again, we are pushing that out to the workstations, and that is what is controlling what gets pushed to a workstation. So you can imagine me as an end user in my organization. If my administrator decides to make a driver change for me, my client agent on the workstation is what's going to effectively carry out that change. So that's kind of a high level of how this works together. Client communicating with server, application server, by the way, not a print server. One of the cool things about our technology is that the jobs spool locally on the workstations. So you don't have that point of failure. If a printer installer server were to go down in your infrastructure, everybody can still print. You don't have that outage. There's not a need to have secondary servers to have failover to. We do support that. If that's of interest to you, we have true industry standard high availability. But overall, you don't see that outage in your environment that you would see with a print server in place. So I think you can probably see in my administrator console, I've got 2 sets of environments for the most part. I have kind of an end user facing one where these are my staff members. They're going to be doing regular printing for their different roles. Could be an accounting department, marketing, all sorts of different things, right? But I also have this Epic infrastructure down here below. And so I'll speak to both of those, but we can concurrently manage both environments in a single instance of Printer Installer, make it very simple. We even have role-based access controls, so you could designate a team that handles just your EMR, and then also a team that manages the more end-user facing printing. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. The other thing that I just want to show you right up front that's probably going to be helpful to know is how you move from an existing infrastructure that you have into Printer Installer. We've got several tools to do this, but I'll show you the most popular ones. I go into this tools menu here at the top. I go to import export, and then I have my options. The most common options are either going to be this tool here, the network scanner, or the import Microsoft printers into Printer Installers Direct IP. Both are very simple tools. There's obviously Novell and other tools that can be used if we need to, but typically the network scanner is great because you point it at a certain set of IP ranges and it finds every active printer and allows you to import that into Printer Installer. But probably the more common scenario is this tool here. So I launch this tool. I'm going to enter the host name of the print server, Epic server, doesn't matter, whichever server I'm dealing with. I'm going to enter its host name. I've already done it, so it populates here, and I just have the one in my demo lab. But when I populate it, you can see I have all the different printers that are on my print server. Now on this side, I just have that infrastructure that I've created. So let's say I wanted to move some printers into my headquarters location at floor number 1. I literally just select whichever printers I want. I've selected the floor already, so I click the green import button, and these printers will get migrated onto Printer Installer. Now, it's more of a copy over function, so you're not going to lose anything on your print server. All your end users will still be printing and spooling on the print server. Nothing's changed yet. You've just copied the queues over. So a printer that's been copied over kind of looks like this. Printer name, location, comment, web interface. All the stuff that you're looking for is going to come across automatically here. And even the drivers themselves will be migrated. So you'll have all of that on the Printer Installer server now. The only thing that's left to do to complete that migration process into Printer Installer is to push out that client agent. So we can do a couple things with the client agent push out. We could integrate with, if you're doing GPOs for deployment, that's fine. We can push out our MSI that way. If you have SCCM or you have another software that's going to push out an MSI or a PKG or a DEB file, that's fine. We provide them all and we'll integrate with whatever solution you use to facilitate that. Once a client hits a workstation, it goes through the user's devices and printers folder, and it starts to convert those queues over to becoming direct IP. So now they're not on your print server anymore. Now they're direct IP queues, and now they're managed by Printer Installer. It's a silent process that happens in the background. So no user's day is impacted at all from a printing perspective. Everything seems to be the same. At that point, you could actually pull a plug on your print server that supports your end user printing. If we're talking about Epic, you're going to keep those print servers intact, or if we're talking about Meditech, either way, I may use them interchangeably. But the idea here is that we're going to manage that print server for you. So typically what happens is you have several different servers, right, to support that infrastructure. We had one customer, Ohio Health. They had about 20 different servers managing their Epic infrastructure. And it's more, probably about 12 servers just covering from the print server perspective, and the other 8 deal more with redundancy. But overall, you've got 20 servers, right? And about 5,500 printers need to be in sync across that infrastructure. So huge organization, lots of printers to manage, and it's all distributed out on 12 servers. So what we can do is we can push this client agent I've been talking about out to the Epic print server and start managing that print server for you. Essentially what happens is you create a single point of management inside a Printer Installer, so you can make a change in one place and it carries out across that whole infrastructure. So I've expanded the Epic folder. You can see I've got these, there's about 10 queues here, and they're being managed. This Dell queue is replicated out across 12 different servers, right? So in that Ohio Health environment, let's say they needed to make a driver change. I'll just switch it to a different driver entirely to show you the change. Let's say they switched over to a universal driver for whatever reason. That's the process that I go through to change that driver out over all 12 print servers they had in their infrastructure for their Epic environment. If I need to make a change to the IP address, we've got a new printer, we've got a new address, maybe we switched over to host names, all sorts of different things might happen. But for me, the change is really easy. I switch that, we're done. that replicates out across the whole infrastructure. If we introduce a naming convention change, we can change it here. We can do all sorts of different changes inside a printer installer. The main point of this is that we're eliminating that potential for human error. Because as you keep repeating these processes, you may have just a minor error, but it causes a huge problem in your infrastructure because everything's not communicating synchronously. So we have that ability now to manage that whole infrastructure. We'll still use that migration tool to copy over the queues from one of your Epic print servers or your Meditech servers, and then we'll bring that into Printer Installer and give you that management capability overall. So now we're eliminating, a lot of those concerns related to how that's managed, and really just getting rid of a lot of the burden for that staff to have to keep manually replicating their changes across all of the infrastructure. So that's kind of a high level about what we do. I've talked about the integration tools and how you can configure that. Probably the easiest way to take over management of your Epic infrastructure is to use this range feature. So I created an IP range. All my servers in my Epic infrastructure are found in this IP range, we'll say. And then I control a deployment. So now we'll just say all printers in this folder, right? That's the option. If we wanted to, we could manually add in the printers, but for a management perspective, this probably makes the most sense just to keep all of your Epic or Meditech printers on your EMRs isolated to the one folder. And then we're controlling that deployment now going forward. Any changes replicate out across the infrastructure. So the setups, it's really easy to set this up and get it configured for your organization, migrate the queues like we talked about. That's all there really is to it from a perspective of managing these. So let's look at some of the tools now. I just want to show you a couple tools that you'll have to manage your printers and kind of what they do. So I'll just pick a different device and we'll kind of look at that high level. So here's my individual printer, right? I've got the details here. I've got the web interface, port information like we looked at before. We did a little bit of driver management, but I just want to show you how easy it is, again, to manage the drivers, whether you're facing the end user environment for printing or whether you're dealing with your EMR. So you can see I've got a bunch of different drivers placed on this Konica Minolta device. I'm dealing with a Dell driver, a Zebra driver, Xerox, and Lexmark. If I want to switch it all out, it's really easy for me to do. These resources here, they're all drivers that I uploaded either from the print server or manually uploaded like this. We're just looking for the INF file from the manufacturer. So we make it really easy. You can literally use any driver that you want as long as it's a signed driver. So basically no custom in-house drivers unless they're signed. Now we can go in, and I've just made those changes, right? Saved it. Now I have this Konica Minolta 4750 driver being pushed out to any user who has this printer deployed to them. I'm targeting it per operating system, which means I could have differences in the driver that's used on Windows 7 versus 10 if I need that in my infrastructure. And I don't have to use universal drivers. I can use native drivers for the devices that I'm managing in my infrastructure, which opens up all the possibilities for what you can do with different profiles, right? If there's a feature for a driver, we can set that up and apply that. So as an example, I'm setting up a black and white duplex setting. What we do with this is we actually can set up the default profile, and we can do it on Macs too, by the way. You can reapply this profile after each print job. So it's not like full lockdown mode where we're limiting what an end user can do. But what we are able to do is reintroduce that profile after they release a print job. So let's say we're just looking for some savings overall. We think converting to black and white as a standard queue for some of our devices is the best way to go. But sometimes people who use those devices do actually need to print in color. Like I said, we're not locking them down. They could override that preference that's set, do their own thing, and then we'll automatically reapply the profile after that print job has been generated. We can do it directly after, or we can do it based on that client check-in. So I talked about the client check-in already, but just as a reminder, the client checks in right after logon, or based on the manual refresh that an end user could initiate. So I could refresh my configurations this way. That's just me doing a check-in for my own machine. Or an administrator can specify a time interval that when that passes, the client checks in consistently at that interval. So like every hour, every 137 minutes, whatever you want to set it to, you can. That's going to control that check-in and keep changes effectively live in your environment without instantaneously impacting the environment right away. So that's what we're doing from a driver management perspective on the one-to-one level. If I go to this repository, I can replace drivers as a whole across my infrastructure. So let's just take this one that I'm highlighting. Let's say it's an old driver. I know there's a newer one. It's a little bit more stable. We'll replace that driver. It tells us all the places it's being utilized. We say, okay, grab the INF like we did before and upload it. But now this replicates out across the whole infrastructure. For any affected printer that was listed in that list that we just saw, it changes out the driver automatically, and then that will carry out to the workstations at the next check-in. So that's how we manage the drivers. Another topic that I do want to spend just a moment on is the deployment side. I think this is a really effective tool in our software. I already showed you the self-service portal and how that works, how an end user can easily self-install a printer. Some organizations don't really like that. They'll feel like, I don't know if I really want my end users to be involved in picking their own printers. I feel like that could complicate things. So let me automate that on the back end. We'll do that as well. You don't have to publish the self-service portal. You could use our deployment options instead. I can choose from Active Directory if I wanted to. I could make a deployment to myself real quick, just as an example. So now that's going out to me. If I log on different workstations, I'm still getting this particular device. If I wanted to do that IP range feature, like we were talking about with managing your Epic servers, that can still apply to end users. And I do see this deployment a lot in healthcare facilities, where we might have a doctor or a nurse moving from location to location, floor to floor, building to building on a campus, whatever it may be, with a need to print. This IP address range deployment is going to facilitate that really effectively. So as an example, facing end users, what I have is this IP range. If you are an end user in this infrastructure and you fall between this range, I've set it up so you get these 8 printers automatically on your workstation. They're just going to show up. You're going to be able to print to them. And the cooler part about it is that when you leave floor 1 of my headquarters in this instance, maybe you go to floor 3, floor 1's printers will drop off your workstation. Floor 3's printers will be added. And the nice part is that we're not removing the driver, we're just removing the printer. So that printer bloat effect for a user who's traveling to location doesn't exist anymore. They don't have to have like 30 or 40 printers on their machine to pick from when they go around to different locations. This automatically populates the printers in their proximity so that they can print to what they need to and leave, and they don't ever have to worry about a printer or a help desk ticket. This just takes care of that for them. Another cool thing is if your facility has different locations and you're concerned about, well, how do we support this off of just a central instance of printer installer at our data center? We might be concerned about bandwidth to other remote sites. The only bandwidth that you would really incur some traffic on is the driver pull down. That's the biggest part of the software, is pulling down the drivers from that central location. So if it is a concern, we can use local resources. This same IP address that I talked about before, if you're an end user that falls between it and I set up a caching location for drivers, you're going to pull your driver from a local resource instead of across the WAN from the data center. And we can use a workstation or a server, it doesn't matter. And it will automatically synchronize updates for the drivers at the core part of our solution to those more distributed cache locations. So that's another way that we can address that. Otherwise, you're really just dealing with direct IP printing. You're going to see typically improvements in latency with the spooling because it's all happening locally. Like I mentioned before, you're not affected by those outages that a print server would affect you with. So server goes down, everybody still prints inside a printer installer. We also have reporting, and this client agent is going to cache that metadata So even in an outage, you don't have a blackout period for your reporting. You'll still get that as well. So it makes it pretty easy to control how printers get managed and how end users are able to print. We keep that pretty dynamic. If I go back to this device and go to deployment, there's a couple other options I just want to touch on. Hostname, maybe we're going to target a bunch of 0 clients. Maybe we have a Citrix infrastructure. We had a customer, VCPI is who they are. They had about 11,000 printers and I think about 24 or 2,500 different locations, and they had a really difficult Citrix environment to deal with. We make the Citrix conversation pretty simple. If you do use Citrix in your infrastructure, we just want to know, essentially, where do we put our client agent? Does it sit on a workstation, or do you have 0 clients, and now our printer installer client is just going to need to sit on the Citrix server or the hosted solution, whatever it is, right? Our client sits there, we spool there for our jobs, and we control deployments still to the endpoint devices because we can identify a 0 client or a thin client by its IP address or by its host name, and we can even deploy through host name as like a wildcard, so you could capture a bunch of machines in a deployment by a naming convention that you might have. MAC address is pretty straightforward. I see it occasionally in deployments. And then advanced group is just a pairing of any of these options together. You're creating rules that either contain or exclude something. So an example would be 2 different groups, security groups who share an IP address range. If you're in one security group and in that range, you get these printers with these settings. If you're in the other group, you get these different printers with different settings. And you can keep that section of rules going on and on and on to tackle terminal sessions and all sorts of different things. So a lot that you can do with this. So those are probably 2 major features of the software, deployment and driver management. I think that's our big value proposition other than eliminating print servers and managing that EMR system. What I can show you is just a couple high-level things that I do want to touch on. Queue management, you're not going to lose that just because you lose your print server. We'll still see the jobs in the queue and allow you to remove those as needed. Status tab lets us know what's going on with devices. I changed the IP on this one, so it should go offline. Yeah, it does. So here we have the error condition field. Now this isn't going to show up because I switched the IP, right? But if there's an active error condition like low toner or overdue maintenance or something like that, in this alerts tab, I can come in and be notified of that going forward. Maybe I just want to be notified low paper, low toner, or something like that. Send it to me. I want that email. It's going to be an email that gets sent to me if this condition ever populates on this device, so I can stay on top of what's happening in my fleet. We could bring in groups, which would probably be more likely than an individual administrator. Easy to do. In this section here, I go into users, and I can add in users through Active Directory or create local to printer installer accounts. Whichever way the organization prefers to do it is fine. What you're really choosing to do is create roles internal to printer installer. So it doesn't necessarily matter what the permission is for a group of users, whether they're like local administrators or global administrators or help desk personnel. That's a great way to categorize them and bring them into printer installer, but we're going to choose what their permissions are inside of printer installer with our roles. You've got 6 standard roles here. You can see on that side, everything from an administrator that has global permission to a print job report manager, help desk, all of that's an option. But probably more importantly is the fact that every permission is very granular, very easy to deal with. So I know what every permission does and I have access to all of them here. I get a description, I can deselect it or choose between view and modify, and I could create my own custom roles. If you have situations where our default roles don't fit, it doesn't matter. You can do exactly what you need to do. You can also restrict access to the folder levels. So initially I'd proposed maybe giving a team access to your end user facing printing and then another team access to your Epic or Meditech infrastructure and keeping those as separate things. Easily something you can do with our system, or you can manage it all together. Totally up to you. But that's how the role-based access controls work. The only other thing that I wanted to touch on here is dealing with the reporting. So there's a lot of different types of reports. I'm just going to run one in particular that's probably among the most granular reports, just to give you an idea of what we capture. I'm just backing this up so I get some records to choose from. Okay, so I've got a few records. You can see date, time, who's printed, what they printed over here, what computer they printed from, what printer they printed to. Here's their department. And then also, because of my display, it doesn't show it up. I've expanded my display to make it easier to see. So I scrolled over there. You wouldn't normally have to, but here's a page count for the jobs. And then here's also cost. The cost doesn't show only because I don't have a value assigned to each of these for the printer that they were printing to. But that's how you do it. You'd apply a template basically, and you get the cost as well. Maybe you want to do a department report. You can do that easily. We can schedule the report too. So maybe I like the idea of a CSV, and I want it to go out to department managers over a certain division. I just enter their email addresses, choose the department here, just give it a name, and then choose how frequently that repeats itself. And now I have an automated report that's just going to continue to be emailed out to the appropriate parties. And you can schedule as many reports as you want, so you don't have to come in and keep running them again and again and again. I feel like that's a pretty good summary of our core set of features. Let me just take one more minute or two to outline some additional modules that we have that deal more with secure printing and mobile printing needs. So first and foremost, I would say the pull printing module kind of serves as a foundation. When I talk about pull printing, it's just a virtual queue is what it comes down to. We share it out with whatever way we want to share out our printers in our deployment tab. Could sit on the self-service page too. But what happens with this is it's kind of a universal device. So a user prints to it and their job gets held until they're able to release it. And they're going to determine the release point as well. So I sent a bunch of jobs to the pull printer. By the way, I'm authenticating to reach this. This is just my portal, not a shared resource. Everybody would have their own authenticatable portal to access. I choose a document, I choose to release it, and then I choose whichever printer I want. My permissions in the self-service portal govern what printers show up. Basically, the deployment governs that, and then also the licensing for the printer. But now I could select a device and release the job to that printer. Now, you can tell I'm doing this obviously in a web interface, which means we're still device agnostic. We don't have to have any control panel embedded application in this variation. You can use older equipment, newer equipment, doesn't matter. You'll be able to do the pull print module from any network connected device. So I could pull up my phone right now, and if it's on the network, I can see my jobs. I can release them to a printer. The more common workflow might be something like a CPA integration, where you literally would walk up to the device of your choice, authenticate username and password, either manually or maybe you've got a badge already set up. We can do registration of the badges inside Printer Installer or capture your Active Directory attribute and use that. Whatever the preference is, we can go there with you. What happens is I still see my jobs the same way that I saw them in the portal, but now I'm actually on the interface of the MFP I've selected to release my job at. So I have that workflow. I have a secure print workflow that forces the job to go to the queue. You talk about like HIPAA requirements, you have to have that visibility to your device. One of the cool things about our secure print module is the user can choose if the job gets held or if it gets released automatically, or an administrator can predefine that. So it can help with that compliancy. You can have those jobs automatically held and have authentication to reach those jobs, whether they use a specific printer or whether they use the pull print queue. Doesn't matter. It's all a matter of preference there for the administrator. Aside from that, we also have those mobile modules. You're going to have something like native iOS printing. Here's just a little example. I'd have my phone on the network. We'd emulate that AirPrint capability. So you could publish those printers to your iOS users. They'd see those printers. They'd be discoverable, basically. You can see the name. You could predefine the queue. So maybe we pick an actual physical printer. and then they're just printing to that printer. If you don't choose to define the printer, maybe you're going to use the pull printer instead and give them that universal release point to go anywhere. That's the other option. It's a native experience inside of iOS though, and so it's very intuitive and easy to deal with. We can do it with Android too. We'll just use a Google Cloud Printer for that side of it. And then there's also an email print module that allows you to specify the name of the printer in the to field of your email, and it will print the body of the email and any attachments. If you're not on the domain and you want guest print, that's fine too. What we can do is enable guest printing. So as long as that guest knows the name of the printer they need to send their job to, they can send it, and an administrator controls how many pages are printed in a 24-hour period by any guest, and then it can also force a black and white queue on them. And it's secured by your existing email infrastructure, so you can still blacklist or whitelist whatever you want. And you also don't have to maintain mailboxes for every device. It's one central mailbox that then distributes based on a routing rule to the printer that's named. So those are the things that I wanted to go over. I think what I'll do is, I know we have a little bit of time. Hannah, maybe you can speak to this. Are the guests of the webinar able to communicate, or are they still on mute?
They are on mute. I can unmute them though if you want, or if they would prefer, they can ask questions in the chat box.
Yeah, so if there are any questions, maybe you can chat those over, or if you'd like to be unmuted, we could definitely do that. Would you like the presenter rights back on the Cortex side?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, great. There you go.
All right, so if you have questions at this point, go ahead and enter them in the chat box or the question box. We will monitor both of them. But while we're waiting for those to come in, I just want to thank everyone for joining today, and thank you to Eric and Chuck for your participation. PrinterLogic is offering a trial of their product. So if this is something that you think would be of interest for you, please go ahead and email Chuck at the email address shown. It's chuck.chestner@cortexservices.com, and we can get that trial over to you. So yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and enter them in the chat or question box. I'll just give it a minute here. I'm not seeing any come in, but again, we will send the recording of this webinar over to you, so you have this available. And then if you are interested in getting a trial, go ahead and email Chuck. And then if you have any questions, I think we're getting a question here. It says, how do you print Epic via Unix, Q, or Epic EPS?
So from a printing perspective, it's still we're still managing it the same way that we manage any kind of Windows printing. If we're dealing with a Unix infrastructure, we're really more of a Windows platform. So if you only have that Unix infrastructure, that may not be a fit for printer installer, and we'd probably look to integrate with a partner of ours that does more customized solutions with us as the front end and them as the back end. So with that integration, that's probably a conversation that we'd want to actually have more directly with you with those teams present, and we could kind of talk about how we approach that and what your specific organization might need. And just something that I wanted to speak to while we're waiting for questions to come in. On that trial request, just so you know what's offered, We typically will do about 50 licenses, 50 for the core set of features, and then 50 for every advanced module too. So you would get the Epic licenses in there as well, and any of the mobile modules. And we usually do it about a 30-day trial period is what it is. You'd sit down with an engineer from my team, like myself, and one of Cortex staff as well. And what we would do is we would run through that scenario that I kind of described, import printers, do the installation of the software first, import the printers, start to create deployments, start to kind of come up with a plan for what that trial looks like and what's our success criteria. And we'll do that about an hour is all it takes to get it set up and get printers starting to be deployed and managed and things like that. And then we do weekly tech reviews where we would ask for about 30 minutes of your time once a week to cover any issues that may have come up or do some additional training for other team members or kind of help you try new things for the testing scope. That's typically what our proof of concept looks like. And just for your reference, it's typically about 70 to 75% of customers who do the trial end up purchasing the software. It's a really intuitive software to get used to, and you really see that firsthand benefit in your own infrastructure. The nice part about the proof of concept, though, is let's say you decide it's not for you. You can remove our client agents from the workstations that you've tested and the servers that you've tested, and they go back to what they are. They're no longer direct IP if you had a print server. The queues stay intact if they're direct IP. They're just no longer managed. So it's really, there's not a lot of burden on your side if the proof of concept doesn't seem like it presents enough value to you, or it's not the right time to purchase is sometimes one of the things that we run into. So it's pretty easy to control the scope of it and to retract it from the infrastructure. On the other hand, like I said, about 70-75% of the time, people are going to go purchase this. And the nice part is it's just a licensing switch. So we give you a production license instead of a trial license, and all your configurations that you've done in that POC remain intact. You're just into production now.
All right, and we did get another question here. It says, what is the typical cost structure based on? Number of printers or AD users?
Sure, great question. So it's licensed per printer object, so it's like the managed queues. You may have seen in my tree structure that I had two Konica Minolta devices sitting next to each other that were the same exact device. I did different queues on them, basically just different profile preferences and different drivers, but it was the same physical device. In that instance, it was consuming two licenses because I'm managing two separate queues that are associated with one physical device. So the licenses will float, but it's licensed per printer that we manage. You could have unlimited client agents, unlimited Active Directory users. It's really not a concern for us from that perspective. Great question.
All right, well, I think that's all the questions we have right now. But again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Chuck. He will line you up with Eric and a pre-sales expert. And then also you can email Chuck for the trial request as well. So again, thank you for joining today, and you will be receiving the copy of the webinar shortly. Eric, anything else you want to add?
No, just thank you to CoreTech and thank you to all the attendees. We really appreciate your time.
All right, well, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day.